January 2026 was a strange month for gaming. On one hand, we saw long-awaited games finally release, major franchises return, and new consoles continue to find their footing. On the other, we saw layoffs, failed launches, and a growing reminder that the games industry is still in a fragile place. So today, we're looking back at everything that mattered in gaming this January, the biggest news stories, the most exciting releases, and the industry trends shaping the year ahead. This is that month in gaming, January 2026. One of the biggest and most controversial stories of January came from Riot Games. Just weeks after launching their League of Legends fighting game 2XKO, Riot announced layoffs affecting roughly 80 developers, nearly half the team. This happened less than a month after the game officially launched on consoles. Riot stated that while 2XKO attracted a passionate core audience, it didn't reach the broader momentum needed to justify such a large development team, so they're downsizing to focus on key improvements and sustainability. This is pretty brutal. A game launches, people are still discovering it, and developers are already losing jobs. It also highlights a bigger trend in the industry. Live service games are extremely risky, and even major studios are struggling to justify massive teams when engagement doesn't explode instantly. 2XK will continue development, and esports plans for 2026 remain intact, but this move raised serious questions about Riot's long-term strategy and the sustainability of massive live service projects. Highguard was supposed to be one of the breakout multiplayer shooters of 2026. Developed by Wildlight Entertainment, a studio made up of former Titanfall and Apex Legends developers, the game promised fast-paced hero combat, fantasy weapons, large-scale PvP maps, and a new live service universe. In early January, Highguard launched to a wave of curiosity and strong initial player numbers. At its peak, it reached nearly 100,000 concurrent players, a solid debut for a brand new IP in a crowded shooter market. But just weeks after launch, the story took a dark turn. Wildlight Entertainment reportedly laid off a large portion of its development team, with some reports suggesting the studio was effectively gutted. For a brand new game, this was shocking. The reasons were familiar and troubling. Player retention dropped quickly. Reviews were mixed, with criticism aimed at repetitive maps, balance issues, and a lack of meaningful progression systems. And in 2026, launching a multiplayer shooter without massive momentum is almost a death sentence. January also hit Ubisoft hard. The company announced multiple game cancellations and delays, including projects tied to major franchises, alongside studio closures and a major internal restructuring. Ubisoft's shares reportedly dropped significantly, reflecting investor concern about rising development costs and shifting player trends. The big takeaway: traditional single-player AAA games are becoming more expensive and riskier than ever, while multiplayer and co-op titles continue to dominate engagement metrics. For gamers, this means fewer ambitious single-player titles, but potentially more polished projects if studios survive the transition. After nearly a decade of hype, cancellations, development hell, and corporate drama, Hytale finally entered early access on January 13, 2026. The Minecraft-inspired sandbox RPG had one of the most chaotic development histories in recent memory. Originally acquired by Riot, later cancelled, then bought back by its original creators. The founders openly admitted the early access version is rough, unfinished, and buggy, but they wanted players to finally experience the game and shape its future. And honestly, after years of silence, just having a playable Hytale is kind of a miracle. This release marks a huge moment for sandbox fans and modders, especially with Hytale's powerful modding tools. One of the biggest releases of the month was Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, finally arriving on Xbox Series consoles and Nintendo Switch 2. This was huge. After years as a PlayStation exclusive, Cloud and the gang are finally reaching a broader audience. Square Enix also impressed with how well the game runs on Switch 2 hardware, proving the system is capable of modern AAA ports. For RPG fans, this was one of the biggest January launches. Bandai Namco also released Code Vein 2, a follow-up to the anime-style Souls-like from 2019. The sequel focuses on a more open-world, deeper character customization and expanded boss encounters. It's clearly trying to compete in the Souls-like arms race, while keeping that stylish anime aesthetic. While the AAA industry struggled with layoffs and massive budgets, January quietly delivered one of its most exciting moments through the indie scene. And leading the charge was a haunting, beautiful Metroidvania called Mio, Memories in Orbit. At first glance, Mio looks like another stylish indie platformer in a genre overflowing with Hollow Knight-inspired titles. But once you spend time with it, it becomes clear that this game is trying to do something far more ambitious. Set inside a massive, decaying orbital megastructure, Mio tells the story of a small android navigating the ruins of a forgotten civilization. The world feels lonely, quiet, and melancholic, more in line with games like Hyper Light Drifter or Grease than traditional action-heavy Metroidvanias. Traversal is the heart of the experience. Mio glides through zero-gravity environments, wall runs across metallic corridors, and unlocks movement abilities that make exploration feel fluid and almost dance-like. It's the kind of game where simply moving through the world is fun and discovery feels rewarding. Combat, meanwhile, focuses on precision rather than brute force. Boss fights are built around pattern recognition and positioning, giving the game a rhythmic, almost musical flow. It's challenging but never unfair, more about mastery than frustration. But what really sets Mio apart is its atmosphere. The soundtrack is minimalist and emotional, the visuals blend hand-drawn art with sci-fi architecture, and environmental storytelling hints at a tragic history without ever spelling everything out. It's one of those games that doesn't just want you to play, it wants you to feel something, and Mio isn't alone. January also saw several other indie and mid-budget titles quietly launch, proving once again that innovation often comes from smaller studios. Games like Escape from Ever After experimented with narrative-driven exploration and surreal worlds. Can push climbing mechanics to realistic extremes, turning mountain climbing into a tense survival puzzle. And City Tales, Medieval Era offered a cozy, storybook city builder that felt more like a living fairy tale than a traditional strategy game. These aren't billion-dollar productions, they don't have Hollywood marketing budgets, but they do have something many AAA games struggle with: clear creative identity. Cult of the Lamb continued its bizarre cult management saga with the Woolhaven expansion, adding new mechanics, mounts, dungeons, and systems. This game just refuses to die, and that's a good thing. Arknight's Enfield launched with a more open-world RPG direction, showing how mobile games are becoming more console-like in scope. This is part of a growing trend. Mobile games are no longer just gacha menus, they're full-scale RPG experiences. January 2026 made one thing clear: AAA gaming is at a breaking point. Layoffs at Riot, restructuring at Ubisoft, endless live service gambles. Studios are spending hundreds of millions on games that might flop in weeks. This is why we're seeing more live service games, more remakes and remasters, fewer risky new IPs. And ironically, some of the most exciting games right now are coming from indie studios with tiny budgets and massive creativity. January 2026 also reminded us of something the gaming industry never forgets: nostalgia sells. This month, classic franchises, remakes, and retro-inspired games continue to dominate headlines and release schedules, proving that the past is still one of the industry's most powerful engines. With Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade arriving on new platforms, it felt like another chapter in gaming history being preserved for a new generation. A game that originally launched in 1997 on the PlayStation has now lived through multiple remakes, ports, and reinterpretations, spanning nearly 3 decades of hardware evolution. And it's not alone. Across the industry, publishers are digging into their back catalogs, bringing back classic IPs, remastering fan favorites, and rebooting franchises that defined entire eras. And that was January 2026 in gaming. A month of big releases, painful layoffs, indie surprises, and the continued rise of new hardware. If this is how the year starts, 2026 is going to be wild. Let me know in the comments. What was your favorite gaming news story from January, and what are you playing right now? If you enjoyed this monthly recap, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next month for February in gaming.